Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Shintaro Higashi Show with Peter Yu. Today we have a special guest, Chris Round. Welcome aboard, Chris. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you, Shintaro. Great to be on here.
Yeah. So, for those of you who don't know, me and Chris have a long history together. We trained at Jimmy Pedro's in early 2010, 11, those days. And you grew up training there as well, right?
Yep. I started judo with Jimmy. Actually, my father trained under his father way back in the day. So,
Oh, shoot. I
family.
didn't know that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 So, been linked to the family for decades.
Yeah. And, Chris Round is a very high level judo competitor, right? Can you give us some of your accolades? Brag a
Sure.
little bit.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate
Yeah.
that. So I was a junior national champion U21. Back then it was U20, aging
Yeah.
myself there. But I also took third at President's Cup. I've consistently made top five and top eight at tournaments like US Open, US Nationals. Um, and I've had the opportunity to be in the room and help folks train for really high level tournaments. I was a training partner, for folks like Ronda Rousey when I was young.
That's
And
right. Rhonda. Yeah.
by training partner, I mean she was kicking my ass.
Yeah.
But
She was tough. Yeah.
I got to help folks get ready for OA in 2012, and as a scout, I've done a lot of scouting work. I helped Kayla and Nick ahead of the Rio Olympics, and
Yeah.
I also helped some folks who were doing worlds during the last squad.
And you have a lot of experience in BJJ as well, too, right? I've seen you doing a lot of competitions, mixing in the match and judo moves and such.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu under Dr. Roddy
Nice.
Ferguson.
Oh, Roddy. I didn't know that was your
Yeah,
coach. Yeah.
yeah, no, and he and I have collaborated on a bunch of stuff together. That
Nice.
the scouting work I did with Kayla, that was in collaboration with him.
Mm.
So we both have kind of an analytics type background and like to get in kind of the nitty-gritty on all that
Yeah.
stuff, so it
What's
worked
a
well.
PhD?
Um, my PhD should be done this year finally,
Okay. Yeah. What
but,
field are you in? Not
environment
grappling, right?
not grappling.
Yeah. That would be cool if that was a PhD right subject, wouldn't it be?
Oh my god, it'd be awesome.
Yeah.
No, environmental science and policy. What I do off the mat, well, I philosophically connect it to judo is nothing
Yeah.
related to judo.
All right. So if you were to get a PhD candidate in grappling, what would your dissertation be on?
Oh my god, I think one thing that's really interesting is when you look at the amount of dead space during matches and how
Mm.
athletes and coaches utilize that. So,
Oh.
yeah, what you can do when you look at is one is the amount of dead space,
Yeah.
from competing, a lot of times is based on two factors. It's based
What do you mean
on
by dead space?
so what I mean by dead space is the space between mate and hajime.
Oh. Oh, okay.
Yeah, because like, once Hajime started, you can argue it's clear there's always some form of activity happening, whether we're moving or changing location around the mat or once we
Yeah.
actually engage with each other. But actually, the dead space when actually technically nothing's happening, there's still things that are happening. There's instructions that are happening in the background. Maybe there's a technical
Yeah.
official that's making a mistake they're trying to rectify.
Yeah.
And we all know those matches where that was a deciding factor. You look at Ole Bischoff versus Travis
Yeah.
Stevens in London. Um, you know, time after time looked like Ole was about to pack it in, and that's nothing against Ole. I mean, he's a great fighter.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then, something would happen and Travis would get yet
Mhm.
more tape on his head, unfortunately, and Ole would be able to get a breath in and be functional.
Yeah, because Travis has a gas tank, right? And that
Oh,
would
yeah.
have played better if there wasn't that dead, in between. Wouldn't it be better to say dead time? Because
That
time has paused and it's no action. Dead space, I thought you were talking about like all the space that's not being used or the space between the two grapplers, maybe where
oh,
they
that would
haven't
be
made
interesting
contact,
itself.
right?
That'd be interesting itself because you think about
Yeah.
I think ringcraft, from boxing, I think that's kind of under discussed a bit in judo coaching in the
Yeah.
United States because, you know, look like a player like Nick Popolo. Nick was really
Mm.
good at either playing the edge where he's trying to draw you into pushing him out so he can get underneath you, or
Yes.
likewise
With his
cutting up
Kumanagi
your
game.
space.
Yeah.
Yeah. So actually, yeah, understanding
Mm.
dead space and understanding positioning and ringcraft within judo itself is really interesting because it's something like, you and I competed forever, so we
Yeah.
understand it intuitively, but it's not there's so many things in
Yeah.
judo matches that are invisible unless you have that experience that you
Yeah.
can spell out.
And you know what? Even at the highest levels, like I found myself like trying to get out of something bad, and then all of a sudden I look down and my foot's in the red zone, and it's like, oh shoot, and you get penalized because you're not paying attention because you're worried about getting slammed. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So people make that kind of mistake all the time, and then I guess having that dead time when your coach is like, hey, you're retreating, watch where your feet is, don't get out of bounds. You're trying to crowd you out. That can make the difference between getting another penalty and not. You get 2 penalties, you're down, right? Because you
Oh
get a
yeah.
third, you're done. You get 3 strikes, you're out, right? So having that second penalty based on that time and having the proper coaching can make or break the match.
Yeah, and the coaching element's
Yeah.
interesting too, because I mean, as you know, every fighter's
Yeah.
different. What their need is different, and it's always interesting to me when I've seen coaches that are unbelievably like spectacular coaches, but the communication styles don't match. And looking at
Yeah.
because it's a personality thing. Like, I mean, I could hear Jimmy's voice through just about any crowd there was because I came up under him, and likewise with
The
Big
big
Jim.
voice, dude,
Oh, he does. Um,
with that
and
thick Boston accent, right?
yeah, or you're like, I mean,
Yeah.
you can hear Kerry Chandler across the state.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. You know,
Yeah.
you have folks who either have big voice or you can hear. You're just trained to hear them.
Yes.
But even then, there's still a communication style element where there are some people who it just doesn't mesh, and it's an
No.
interesting psych element. I could see a psych PhD out of that, honestly.
Yes. Well, what would be your, like, theory that you would wanna test out and stuff?
Um, well, regarding
And how would you collect the data? It would be the next question after that, because you're a analytics guy, like you said.
yeah, so it's effectively it's called coding and qualitative research. So what you would start with is when you identify kind of the behaviors I'm trying to track for. There's
Mm.
2 ways of doing this. One is if I'm looking at, let's say I'm looking at dead time. If I wanted to focus in on the coaching, the first thing I do is I try to get transcripts and timestamps of all of the coaching that was
Okay.
going on. And then I'd also need to watch the video and visually recognize and see if I could encode the behaviors I'm seeing in the match, and then see if I can find
Mm.
linkages. And upon you have to more or less have 2 separate code books. The code book is like a physical behavior code book for the
Yeah.
match itself, which actually isn't that different from what you would do in a scouting scenario. Like I build
Yeah, for
scouting
sure.
analytics stuff
Yeah.
for my team all the time. I
Yeah.
actually have a side business doing that. Um,
Mm.
but what you would then do is you take a lot of that data and then try to see if it correlates with
Yeah.
what the coach was saying. Um,
Okay. Yeah, and then you would do a regression analysis or something like this?
you
No?
could, it would depend on your approach.
Yeah.
You could do that. You could go a natural language processing route as well.
So, okay, so back to the coaching, because that's what you're kind of in this game for, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Now, so I know, we've competed together. You're entering a new phase in your life where you're starting your own gym,
Club. Yes.
judo club, right?
Yeah.
It's judo or jiu-jitsu.
So actually, we're within a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu club, High Noon Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in
Where
Alexandria,
is that?
Virginia.
Virginia. Okay.
Yeah, just outside of DC.
Yeah.
So we've been there for almost a year now. We
Yeah.
train 5 days a week. We've got a solid group of assistant instructors.
Mm.
I wrote up a whole curriculum,
Nice.
and
Tell me about that curriculum.
sure. So
Yeah.
so it's funny because you start when you go to write that curriculum, you write down like almost everything you possibly think know in grappling. And you go,
Yeah.
all right, they've got to know all this stuff. Then you realize, they've only got so much time in the week. I've only got so much time in the week. And
Yeah.
it's been paring down, paring down, paring down. I'm actually on the verge of finishing up kind of a 2.0
Nice.
version.
Okay.
But in developing that, what I'd sat down, I said, all right, well, let's actually take, we think of the 3 classic parts of a throw, Kazushi, Kore, Kake. Well, you can break that down even further. You can break it down to like kind of the basic elements of a throw. When you look at the different types of movement. So like a swing step on like a swing step Uchimata, or
Oh,
the way
yeah. Okay.
or the way an way different Ochi hooks happen, like a tight hook for like a classical Ochi versus like have a more broader hook from what like
Yeah.
Jimmy's Ochi.
I love that you're saying this because this kind of shows like your depth of understanding, right? Because
Mhm.
people say, oh, when you go Ochi, your toes should scrape the floor in a nice circle. And there's no other way. Some people still say this kind of thing. And you're like,
Mhm.
this guy doesn't really know. But I like it that you said that there's different types of hooks when it comes to the Ochi. Those things have to be taken into consideration.
Yeah,
It really shows your understanding of the
th-
stuff. It's great.
thanks, Shintaro. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I spent a lot of time training a guy named Ryan Hall. Really in
Oh,
the
yeah.
UFC.
Of course. Yeah,
Yeah,
we know everyone knows Ryan Hall.
yeah. So Ryan and I
Yeah.
worked together for like 5 years.
I didn't know that. Wow. That's so cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. On the BJJ side, so on the judo side, most of my time was with Jimmy. I also spent a lot of time with Jason and Radi. And then on the BJJ side, my ranks through Radi. And I also trained with a local club, Phoenix, in the Boston area. That was an awesome club. But
Yeah.
I got a chance to train with folks like I trained with Ryan for about 5 years. I trained with a
Nice.
little bit with Morella Santana.
Yeah.
Um,
Cool.
yeah. So like a good example of when we're thinking about these elements of throws is let's think about Uchimata for a second. You
Mm.
you think about that classic elbow debate, hey, why is somebody's elbow high? Well, let's take a second and think about what are we actually trying to do mechanically here? I'm just trying to create a seesaw underneath somebody effectively. Does it matter where that elbow is as long as I'm getting that seesaw effect? Not
Really? Yeah, no, yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah.
if we break throws down to those basic elements and kind of we can understand like what is actually important.
Yeah.
So in rewriting my curriculum now, what I basically did was try to break down all the different elements that someone would need to know physically and like have in their physical vocabulary to do different types of judo throws
Mm.
and focus on that while also,
Yeah.
meeting some basic requirements USA Judo sets. And that way they have the physical tool set. So let's say they go to a camp and it's, someone who comes from a wildly different style of judo, someone who's like teaching like a Mongolian style judo or something like that.
Mm.
They have the physical tools or they can break it down and understand what's going on. And that's what I'm
Yeah.
trying to do with my basic curriculum.
And that's a basic curriculum. Wow, that's interesting. So is it like a 8-week program, 6-week program? Is it like different moves that get, or is it
It's a
conceptual based? Like what kind of, tell me more about this.
so it's about 6 months,
Six
that
month
we
curriculum. Bam. Okay. Nice.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm still finishing up the edge on the 2.0 version.
Mm.
And what a lot of what I'm doing is once you get to brown belt, when you're working with me, it becomes much more conceptual. Like I'm fixing things like making sure you understand your gripping, making sure that you understand those more advanced
You do have good
concepts.
gripping.
Thank you. I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Yeah.
Um, it didn't help me much when you and I were trading, but
A long time ago, this is the thing, right? Like you and me training in 2012, we were two different people.
this is true.
Now, who knows, man? You probably a lot better. And, I have a different style too. And,
Mhm.
our judo game evolved. So
This is
whatever I
true.
knew your judo from 2012, I'm sure it's not the same and even then your gripping was good. So I'm sure it's even better now.
I appreciate that.
Do you introduce gripping in the basics curriculum?
Yes, I introduced kind of some of the basic openers. So if you think about gripping, so people talk about grappling as chess all the time, but they don't actually think they don't apply that thought. So
I love it that you just said that. I love it that you just said that. You're absolutely right. Because even in chess, there's many different openings, right? King's pawn, queen's pawn, gambit, this and
Mhm.
that. And then, right. And then there's all these philosophies about, structuring your pawn structure, like all these different concepts that come along with chess openers, like,
Exactly.
or, chess tactics and such. Like, judo's like chess. All right. Do you play chess? It's like, not really.
Uh, you have to think about because you have to actually think about when you're teaching, particularly when you teach gripping. You have to talk about openers. You have to talk about what the mid game feels like, and
Yeah.
then what the
Okay.
end game feels like, and then what you can do. So there's, in my opinion, there's like two, like there's mixes, of course, but there's two main routes you can go about doing this.
Yeah.
One is you lay out the gripping foundations, not in that you want your white belts gripping fighting each other to death, but
No.
you lay it out where they at least they kind and when they go with a brown belt, they kind of know, all right, don't give the brown belt my right hand first.
Yes. Okay.
And you give them, all right, here are your basic openers. And here's a few grip breaks. And the more important part is understanding what are the different positions that you get to play from. And then from there, when you show, say, Ippon Seoinage, they can start to think, hey, where can I plug this movement in? I think this was something I didn't.
No, I love it. I love it. Just love it.
So this was something I
Yeah.
hadn't thought of really. Actually, when I got hurt the first time,
Mm,
I think you were with at this the time I blew my shoulder out.
yeah.
I remember I was taking an organic chemistry class at the time, and
Yeah.
that was a miserable experience. But
Yeah.
but a lot of organic chemistry, it's picturing two molecules and seeing how they come together. And I
Yeah.
realized it's the same style of thinking we have for grappling. And then I started thinking, well, if I can take this movement, where else could I place it? And that's where you start to recognize. I think that's one of the things that really changes when you become a serious competitor at the black belt level. And even if you're not
Yeah.
intellectually like figuring it out this way, it's like, okay, I've got a Morote Soanagi. That Morote
Yeah.
Soanagi can become a Sode from a different grip.
Man, that's really, really good. I was just saying this with Peter, not what you just said so eloquently, but I was talking about Ippon Seinagi and Sode is the cousin. And if you could do the entry for Ippon Seinagi, the Sode might be there. The cousin can
Hmm.
fill in for this. You said it much better, but nice. That's great. Yeah, I love that. I love that. Yeah, people intuitively do it, right? And then a
Hmm.
lot of times the high level competitor and grappler aren't academics or intellectual. I don't say not intellectuals. I'm not saying that, but like
Hmm.
they take a different approach. It's feel based. They're tactile kinesthetic learners generally, right?
Yeah.
So the way you just explained it, nailed it. Really.
And it's really important. I appreciate that. It's really important to be able to break things down like this, not necessarily because I want to bore people to death, but
Mm,
what we have to do, like, there's a lot of things we have to do for America to become better on on the world scene in judo. But one of the
yeah,
fundamental
that's
things
a
we
long
need
road.
is we need more quality teachers. And
Yes.
if we can break things down like this, like, do I want to be coaching people who make an Olympic team someday? Of course. Like, what coach doesn't want to do that? But
Yeah.
one of my primary goals is I want to make sure that I produce a lot of black belts who can teach, because they're going to go ahead and they'll move on with their lives and hopefully they'll stay involved in judo.
Yes.
And that will, the less siloed, kind of the elite sections of American judo are, the more like this information is out in the general public and taught in a systematic way, I think you'll see a better quality of judo come from it.
Oh yeah, definitely. Nice. That's
Mhm.
so interesting. So now you're breaking into this world. I'm kind of like hung up on the curriculum side of things, but I
You're
guess we
fine.
can move on. Yeah, yeah, because I was like, wow, that's a really interesting approach to the curriculum. I love what you said about like, okay, white belts gripping. You don't want to go gripping to death. Like, don't put your right hand out. They're
Hmm.
dominant, right?
And don't forget
It's good stuff.
situational
Yeah,
work. Just before we move
yeah.
on, just don't forget, I can teach my white belt gripping and I can still just set them on 50-50, lapel, tricep each and go, all right, you guys are just going to be working on your throwing here. You can
Yeah.
use, I think something that people make a mistake about is when they think about teaching gripping, I can just
Mm,
use situational randori as a way to bypass those barriers. So people will still develop that throwing capability.
yes, because you don't want somebody that can grip a lot but can't throw.
Hmm.
It's like how much you focus on each thing, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, and then sometimes you doing your sensei judo and you're kind of like hanging out, just fighting position, defending stuff, and then you're like looking in the room and people start copying that. Now everyone's doing sensei judo. They're not actual throwers. That kind of happens sometimes
Yeah.
too. So yeah, and now okay, so you're running this new program, you're
Hmm.
launching it, right? You've
Hmm.
already launched it, or
Yeah. Launched in June last year. We're coming up our 1 year anniversary on the 11th.
how's that going?
Going well. We've got, a small club.
Yeah,
What I've kind of tried to do is there's a few really good players in the DC area, and I've kind of tried
yeah.
to get it so that we can all kind of work together. So I'm going to coach in Ecuador or next month for the Continental Open there. I'll be working with
Oh, you're
Yasim.
gonna coach with the national team?
Yeah.
Oh
I'm
shoot, I didn't know you were doing that.
Yeah, I'm working with two
Yeah,
folks right now.
yeah,
I'm the personal
yeah.
coach going down for Yasmin Alaman, who she works with a lot of clubs in the area. She trains at like Sport Judo. She trains at a bunch of
Nice.
places.
Okay.
And then David Terrell, who's over training with
Oh, yeah,
Ryan
yeah,
Holm.
yeah, yeah. Okay,
Mhm.
wow. Nice, nice. So you're trying to climb up the rankings of the USA coaching certificate and all this stuff?
Yep.
Can you give somebody yeah, go ahead, Continental what?
I'm Continental right now. So for folks who are interested in this pathway,
Yeah, let's talk about that and all the different levels and such and how you can get onto this scene of coaching, right?
yeah.
Some guys, they can't really do judo, but they know judo and they should be good coaches, right? So they have to take the credentials and let's
Mhm.
see how does that system work?
Yeah. So number one is you have to go to a basic coaching introduction clinic.
Yeah.
Pat Burris tends to run in USA Judo, so he's the person.
He's the man.
If you're
Love
going
that
through
guy.
USA Judo, you go
Yeah.
to Pat.
Yeah.
USJ has a good program as well. USJF has a program. If you want to coach internationally, though, you have to go through USA Judo. And Pat is very supportive of people trying to move
Yeah, he's
forward.
amazing. Yeah.
So there's different levels. There's state, there's regional, national, continental, international gold.
Yeah.
Uh, so I started out based because of my success in competition. I started out right out the gate as a national coach.
Oh,
Uh,
is that the thing? I didn't know that was a thing.
yep. I had spoken to Pat and I said, hey Pat,
Yeah.
I have this background. Here's my
Yeah.
competition record. Here's where I came from. He's like, okay,
Yeah, he
sign up
knew
on
you for
national.
years.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So what is the ranking again? Go ahead from the beginning.
I believe it's state. I might be missing a level. So,
Yeah. Yeah,
but I
sir.
believe it's state, regional, national, continental, international gold. International
International
gold.
gold. Wow.
Yeah, that's if you've
Yeah.
been coaching on a world team or an Olympic team.
Oh, wow. I know I'm international, but I didn't know there was a one above it.
Yep.
Maybe I'm continental. I don't even remember. Yeah, one of
Yeah,
those guys. Yeah, I gotta look it up.
I'm trying to get towards my international right now because right
Yeah.
now, if you're below international, if you go
Yeah.
to coach at like a Continental Open, you do need permission. And you
Wow.
also need to, if you're not the official USA Judo coach, you have to be attached to certain athletes. Like, as I
Mm.
said, I'm helping David, who represents Ryan's school. I'm helping Yasmin, who
Yeah.
represents a few schools in the area. I'm also working with right now. I'm working with Nick Del Popolo as well. So I'll probably go into some events this year to help him.
Nice.
Yeah. So it's I'm still at the beginning stages of that. It was funny because I saw Jimmy at nationals, and I was running around with like a chicken with my head cut off. And
Yeah.
it was funny because a couple of times I did get to counter coach Travis,
Mm.
or I got to just watch Jimmy coach. And I'm still learning from just watching him, listening to him coach. And I think
Mm.
something that I do think something that a mistake that people make when they're coming into coaching is, one, they assume just saying, go, go, rah, rah, and cheerleading is doing much. It
Yeah.
can, but it's not high level coaching.
Some people respond to that too, though. Some people really respond to that.
Oh, there were moments. I mean,
Yeah.
there was a bronze medal match I was coaching through where like the last 2 minutes, I just needed this guy to stay in it, to not mentally break. Like there's
Yeah.
moments for that. I think that you have to study other coaches and what they're doing, and you have to, just as you would, it's not adversarial, but you have to study, just as I would study opponents when I was getting ready for competition. I have to look at what other coaches are doing, either in their mat side coaching or in discussions around how they run their plays,
Yeah.
because it'll give me ideas on how to improve. But I think
Yes. Yeah.
if you let this stuff get stale, it's easy for me to say right now because I'm in my 30s, I'm
Mm.
young-ish,
Yeah.
in this stage. But if you let this stuff get stale,
Mm.
then you know it stops being fun.
Oh yeah, for sure, without a doubt. No, you got to learn and keep, getting better and better. So,
Hmm.
yeah, speaking of good coaching, like, what do you think makes a good coach? What do you think distinguishes you? And what did you learn from Jimmy, Jason, some of the coaches that you had, specifically in judo? Because
Yeah.
I mean, jiu-jitsu too.
So one thing that it's funny because he's known as being pretty rough around the edges, but I actually really appreciate. I always felt like there was some empathy underlying Big Jim.
Mm.
If you had to, as you had to kind of like sit there and look for it,
Yeah.
but he wasn't going to bullshit you. He
Mm.
was going.
That's
He
true.
wouldn't.
Yeah.
And you could tell it was very much a. I'm going to tell you the truth because I want what's actually best for you. Like it's not just
Yeah.
I want you in my dojo to be a training buddy for my actual star person. Like
Yeah.
this is what I think is actually best for you.
Mm.
And I think I think that's different when I think of other coaches that were kind of the hammer that I've had. Um, what separated Big Jim from a lot of them was I always had a sense of he really is intending what's best behind that. Versus
Mm.
I'd have other coaches, that hammer coach like in wrestling, where
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
are you giving me crap just because you had a bad day? Like
Yeah.
that
They
that
got the whole week on the guy.
yeah, that was never my feeling with
Yeah.
him.
Yeah.
That extends a bit to Jimmy. What I got from Jimmy was Jimmy taught me how to teach. Jimmy used to tell me, he goes, look, you need to teach as if you're working with blind students, because that way, one, people who are just auditory learners, and they'll get more out of it. You'll understand the technique better, and your visual learners will see all the details and get reinforced. And then you'll come back with your tactile learners, and a lot of times you'll get them on the way back. I don't know if he ever broke it down quite that far, but I remember him repeatedly talking to me about
Yes. Yeah.
imagining
There's
a blind
definitely
students.
learning types. That's a real thing. Some
Hmm.
people like are, interpersonal learners, intrapersonal learners. There's very different types, right? So you have to kind of differentiate instruction based on that.
Yeah,
What
and
about Jason? What kind of good coaching things that he,
um, Jason was good at introducing me to a slightly different style of judo.
Mm.
I appre
specifically coaching though? We'll talk about coaching. So
Okay,
like, what did you learn from, to be a good coach, Jimmy, Big Jim, Jason,
yeah,
because those are the people who are main players in the game right now, right? That
yeah.
you're affiliate with.
So what I picked up from Jason was, Jason tended to bring a strong confidence mat side,
Oh yeah, that's
to
without a
say the
doubt.
least.
Yeah.
And he really, I he really wouldn't let a bad call stand easily. And yeah, people can go overboard with that. But one thing I definitely picked up from
Yeah.
Jason was, one, was really good mat side, so I tended to learn a lot from that. Both him and Jimmy were, and
Yeah.
I just understanding kind of when to put the gas on a bit on ref or tech officials because something isn't quite right.
Yeah.
I appreciate that from him. I also, for what it's worth, I mean, I used to go train with him every summer,
Yeah.
and I used to get just like random stuff out of him that was just kind of useful.
Mm.
So
I remember seeing, being coached against Jason, right? Like,
mhm,
so I'm competing against one of his athletes and Jason's coaching one of his athletes against me.
mhm.
And, I remember I had a match with this guy, not to cut you off or anything. I'm sorry,
Go
but,
ahead.
just talk about coaching and, just like what you said with the instilling confidence in your athletes, he did that so good with his guy. who I
Mhm.
believed I outskilled him by a lot, right?
Mhm.
And then, I went for something, it didn't work, we went down to the ground. And as we were walking back, Jason goes, "You see, this guy sucks. He's not that good.
Mhm.
He's got nothing." Right. And then I was like, what? It kind of got in my head. And then the guy was like, yeah, maybe.
Yeah, he
And then
would.
like, yeah. And he was like chipping away at my confidence, just Matt's side. Right. And then it was like, the guy went for something and almost like countered me. He's like, "You see that? There it is. It's there again. It's just always going to be there, dude. You see, you got this. You can throw him. You're in
Mhm.
the game. You're in the game. And then
Mhm.
like he like got in his kid got more and more confident, and the kid just started getting more and more aggressive. He's in the game. He's like, "Yeah, you got it. You got it." And I'm kind of like, and then Jason was kind of like preemptively saying the stuff that I was about to do.
Yeah,
Right.
he was.
So like he's looking for that Uchimata, just step over and stretch it. You can stretch it. His Uchimata sucks. And then I was like, wait a minute, should I go for this thing now? Or is he going to step over and am I going to get stretched? Because Jason was good at that, right?
Mhm.
Eventually I threw him, you
Mhm.
know? But then I remember Jason coming up to me. He goes, "You know what your problem is?" To me, right? He goes,
Yeah.
"You just gave him too much confidence because you didn't end it quick enough. You gave him too much confidence." And I was thinking to myself, like, you did that. But I was like, maybe I should have been a little bit more aggressively trying to finish it in the beginning, but it was
Mhm.
very like, I walked away from it thinking like, oh, that was a very interesting experience, you
That
know?
yeah, you just nailed it better in terms of describing his mat side coaching than I
Yeah.
did.
Yeah.
Because it was interesting that because I grew up fighting all of his guys all the time, and there
Yeah.
was an element where eventually I did have to learn, just like I have to tune that voice out,
Yeah.
because he was very good at getting into the other guy's head as well. Um,
Yeah.
I I appreciate all the folks I mentioned. I appreciate their technical coaching. I A lot of how I approach like curriculum design and a lot of how I kind of think of grappling from a theoretical basis comes from Dr. Ferguson. I mean, really, a lot of how I think of judo from and grappling overall from a theoretical base, talking about things like the elements of a throw or understanding how to reuse stuff. A lot of that
Yeah.
came out of discussions with him, and a lot of the scouting I learned. I learned either from proximity to him or was based on ideas I got out of those discussions. So I really got a lot out of him. Particularly after I left Jimmy's, I was in graduate school. I was um,
Yeah.
around the working world. So I didn't get to go back to Boston a lot, but I was always in regular contact with Ruddy. So I got a lot out of those discussions.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Is he still coaching down in Florida?
Yeah, he is. I'm actually going down to Florida in a couple weeks to help him with a training camp. He runs this awesome program,
Nice.
and
Yeah.
he does
Aren't you
this.
running a training camp as well?
Yes, I am. I'm
Yeah.
running a training camp in July. It's from the 17th to the 22nd. We're going to have Nick Del Popolo be in town, Ajax Tadahara, Nina Kutra Kelly are coming out.
Nice.
Nina was on the last Olympic team. Ajax was on a bunch of world teams. I'm sure you two fought back in the
Yeah. I
day.
fought that. Yeah. Many times. Yeah.
Um, then, the Taraos will be in town. We're trying to put together a really good camp, and
Nice.
it's free for anyone who's on the national roster.
Oh,
So
wow. Damn.
yeah,
Okay.
if you're on the
Yeah.
national
That's pretty cool.
roster, it's free,
Yeah.
and we'll find housing for you. We'll make it work.
Can I stay in that little bunk bed behind you over there in the video?
Sure. That's actually not a bunk bed. I have a bunch of reptiles back there.
Tell me more about that. What do you have? Snakes back there?
I have a blue tongue lizard, blue tongue. There's also some blue
Nice.
tongue skink.
Ah,
I have a leopard
okay.
gecko. I've kept reptiles.
So if you're 60 or 66 kilos, they could stay in the little bin there.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
You'll snuggle up with the lizards.
Yeah. That's awesome, man. So
Mhm.
how many is it going to be a nice turnout for this camp? Like what is the expected turnout?
Um,
What does the schedule look like? Training camp schedule. I know Colton's doing a camp end of this month also,
yeah,
and
he's
he
doing
has
really
like a
big.
whole, yes, he is. And it's going to be like a morning thing. This is how it's got to be, right? The champions have to be accessible, for the next generation to get brought up. And I think, you, Colton, all these guys who are our age, our, generation,
Mhm.
I think
Mhm.
we're doing, a good job now, right? Pushing this kind of stuff, being out there, YouTube, this and that.
Yeah, you and Gary are
Yeah.
doing awesome work with Kikuchi and Kano, and
Yeah. Thanks,
yes,
man.
yeah. So to answer, I still need to stop by Kano. I keep meaning to.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Anytime in New York.
so it's gonna be 2 days. And the way it's gonna work is it's also gonna involve cross training because we're also a Brazilian Jiu Jitsu gym. So there's some great
Mm.
Brazilian Jiu Jitsu bodies there as well. It's gonna be twice a day, and mornings are gonna be long technical sessions. Something I picked up from Rodney were deliberate practice sessions. So we go in, we're on the mat for 3 or 4 hours.
Yeah.
and you are there to perfect one or two things.
Mm.
And with the objective being you leave that week or you leave those few morning practices with something it's not just I learned something new. It's like, okay, this is now part of my game. So that was a type of
Mm.
training I picked up from Radi.
So what is a good example of something that you may work on in that camp? And can you choose those things, or is it something that's going to be taught?
It's gonna depend on the person. Generally speaking, it's gonna be a bit of choice. Like I'm planning to meet with each person who's coming in, who's prepping for
Yeah.
US Open to say, all right,
Yeah.
what are your technical objectives here? Here's where we can assist. More general things, on the feet, there's gonna be a lot of gripping. There's going over that because it's
Yeah.
my personal specialty. We have some people there who have a
Yeah.
stronger base in tachiwaza, like Nick. Um, on the newaza side, a good example of what this practice looks like is let's look at an over underpass. Let's
Oh,
say we're
okay.
dealing with somebody
Yes.
who has a gap
Yeah.
in passing guard.
Yeah.
Well, th- I think if there's progressions in terms of how effective you act, in terms of where you can rate a skill. Base level is static. So, you need a certain X number of static repetitions to get to a certain point.
Yeah.
And then you start adding layers of difficulty. You start, all right, now when this person comes in, they're allowed to start shrimping a little bit. Now when they come in, and you progressively add that. So the beginning of the practice isn't that hard. You're doing a route static movement. And, if you're taking
Yeah.
calls, it's hard, but eventually you're moving it up where I think too much time gets spent in pure randori. I don't think that's actually as valuable. It's valuable like on the high end, it's valuable for cardio to get tougher. But developing games or developing many small situational randori situations, eventually you're gonna work them
Yeah.
up and you'll be far more effective at it. Because it's not just being able to do a route movement. It's being able to do a
Mm.
route movement in a chaotic situation.
Yes. Yes.
So that's the process for the mornings is we're focusing on technical development in the mornings, and then the evenings will be rumbling.
Okay. So
Plus
the
the
morning
randori.
practice, are they going to be situational live?
Yes, there will.
Yeah. Nice. And then what percentage is Tachiwaza versus Newaza?
Um, in the evenings, it'll be about 50-50.
Oh, good. Good.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah.
And everyone will have to do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu right for an hour before that as well as part of
Is
getting
this
ready.
going to be in Virginia?
Yep. It'll be at high noon in Alexandria, Virginia.
Oh, that's amazing. What about food accommodation and such? Go out to
So
get your own food?
you have to get your own. But we're
Of
right by
course.
we're
Yeah.
by a supermarket. There's a hotel up the
Yeah. Yeah.
street that's pretty cheap.
Yeah.
And we'll, as I said, elite competitors are coming in. We'll figure something out. You might be sleeping with the lizards, but we'll figure something out for you. Mhm.
Wow, that's amazing. All right. So you're now running this club,
Mhm.
right? Your judo program. So
Mhm.
what is your approach? We talked a little bit about the curriculum. Like, what is your, let's say, teaching style? Like, is there sort of that distinguishes you from some of the people that, you learned from, like, have you synergized everything into this, Chris Round pedagogical specialty thing? Like, what distinguishes you in this world?
So I think how I teach techniques is very much, coming from Jimmy. But one thing I do that's very
Yeah.
different is I can run 3 or 4 different classes effectively at a time on one mat. So I'm very
Mm.
big on, all right, we're very bespoke. This person needs X or this group of people need X. They're often in one corner doing that and being able to step in and maintain all of that going on. So,
That's very, very, that's interesting that you say that, because it's so easy, right? To teach
mm,
one position, couple different techniques, go do it, bring it back. Everyone freaking do it. Let's go Randori, you know?
mhm,
And you get a couple people trying to hit the move of the day or whatever it is. You get the flavor of the week or whatever, right?
mhm,
And it's a little bit loosey goosey. It's okay. It's completely fine,
mhm,
and sometimes, the teacher knows who's in the room, what they need and all this stuff. But I
mhm.
like it that you said you have differentiated instruction for the people in the room and you could put little pockets of feel. You also do that tonight.
Yeah, the other reason why it's really useful is, so let's talk about injuries for a second. So
Mm-hmm.
one thing that's important to me, so, as you know, like I'm on the autism spectrum, a special education was very important for me coming up. There's a
Yeah.
special education element that is effective with both elite competitors and also your recreational folks coming in, where especially folks who maybe are dealing with a disability or dealing with something going on, where let's say, for example, I have to help an athlete work around an elbow injury. Well,
Okay.
the lessons I learned from helping that athlete work around that elbow injury might be useful for dealing with somebody on the more recreational end who's maybe coming with a disability. Um,
Yes. Yes. Yes.
and
Okay.
there's an
Yeah.
element where there's also another really important element where If people get out of the
Mm,
habit of going to practice,
yeah.
it's hard to keep them in. Whereas if you
Yes.
develop the ability, and man, it takes creativity. A lot of times
Yeah.
it involves some being spontaneous on the
Yeah.
fly, but if you can have developed an encyclopedia in your head
Yeah.
of different drills and practices that people can do regardless of where they're at. Even I've had people who've come in who I had an athlete who she really badly pulled her hip. She couldn't
Mm.
walk. So obviously she's not getting on the mat. But so what I did was like, okay, here's the basics of how you do scouting. We're gonna walk through it really quickly. Here's kind of the crash
Yeah.
course.
You brought scouting into the conversation a few times.
Yeah, sure.
Let's talk a little bit more about, can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, sure.
Before you bring it back to what you're just talking about now, I don't mean to like take you away, but
No,
I
sure.
think people are like listening to scouting. Okay. Let's, hear more about that. So
Sure. So there's two schools of scouting that you'll see. The main school is just, all right, Shintaro, you and we're working with an athlete. We're going to sit down. We're going to watch what their opponents do. We're going to mark it down and say, okay, here's a general strategy. That's like the classical version of scouting, and that's totally legit. The more advanced one that you see, if you ever seen the movie Moneyball?
yes, loved it.
Yeah. So effectively, what I'm in the middle of trying to work on is, what does sabermetrics look like for judo? What does that kind of quantitative analysis look like for judo? Now, judo is such a chaotic, complex sport that you're not going to be able to do. Yes, go ahead.
No, I'm loving it. I'm loving it. Yeah, I love it.
You're not going to be able to do quite the same level of precision as you would with baseball. This has to do discrete versus continuous variables and other statistical nonsense.
Yes.
But you can start to pick up on things. For example, all right, I know this athlete has a great Osoto, and maybe a lot of my focus, if I'm not keeping track of the data, is how to counter that Osoto, or maybe it's my athlete. I'm like, my first, okay, what do I pair with that Osoto? But if I have a graph I use that actually just shows each of the 8 cardinal directions for throws. And I can then go ahead and downsample from that. All right, how many attacks in each direction are they doing? I can then downsample and say, all right, this is how this looks like in each weight class they fight. This is how they looks like against a certain opponent.
But you've already made this?
I work with a group called Athlete Analyzer. I was doing all this on my own in Excel sheets, for years. This is what I did to help Kayla Harrison out before she won gold in Rio. And then Athlete Analyzer came along, and I've been working with them since, and they have a system that does a lot of the computation for me.
All right. So let's talk about some of the findings. Can you tell me about some of the I have some like theories too, and you could like, all right, quantitatively, you could say like, inside versus outside, righty versus lefty. Everyone says inside's always better, and we just kind of accepted it, but I don't think that's true, And then it's like, how many drops to the weak side do you have? Like a lot of right versus left. Left players have a dropped weak side Ippon Sedagi, right? Always. So it's like, how many of those guys are successful, right? What is the true statistics between how many righties and lefties? Right. It's things like this, what is some of your findings?
So some of the questions you're mentioning, I don't have enough of a sample size yet to say conclusively yet, but some of the things I've noticed with my folks, I noticed gaps. Like I just noticed gaps that there are certain directions they aren't attacking, that there's just nothing there. And maybe using that older school style of coaching would have just been like, all right, well, I'm focusing, okay, they've had opponents and I got a good coach, Isutemi. Oh, maybe I need to focus on developing another level change or something like that, or maybe there's a gripping issue. Well, fundamentally, if they're only attacking back left and forward left, and they've got nothing else going on, well, then what am I going to use that time for?
Dude, that was my problem until I was like 27 years old, dude. Where were you when I was 27?
I was probably fighting myself. So, and part of my interest.
Yeah, wow. That's so interesting, man. That's so interesting.
Yeah. So part of where my interest came from that was because I didn't have the most, once again, autism stuff, because I didn't have the most athletic talent. I had to sit there and see, how do I game these things out? Because I have a margin for error that's going to be less than other people. So that's where my interest came from. Was I used to sit down with video camera, videotape everybody, like try to log behaviors, try to do all of that, and just grew out of that naturally.
Interesting. You kind of, a lot of the stuff that you had, like physical issues, you already outgrew?
It's more that they don't show up unless I'm compared to peers. So a good example is like, I can do a cartwheel Uchimata. If you compare my cartwheel Uchimata to like Nick's cartwheel Uchimata, it looks like crud. It's something where because of all my experience in judo, compared to the average person, it wouldn't come up. But if I'm compared to say like another person who made top 5 at nationals or top 5 at President's Cup, they'd be like, "Oh, the moveset he's using is much more limited." Like I had to hyper specialize in mat work and moves like Sumi.
Yes, that's right. You're a Sumi guy.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
Sumi doesn't require me to maintain in the same level of balance. Let's say it's not that I didn't have any Shimada, but I couldn't make that my go-to. All right, we're gonna win or lose on this. It had to be something like a Harai Makikomi or Sumi, something where I had to create a lot of closed loops where if I entered something and didn't work, I could successfully navigate my way back, usually through another attack, back safely to stance. Because if I left openings there, I couldn't rely on my own balance to be able to catch
Ah,
myself in the air when I spun out.
that's so
So
interesting.
a
So
lot of
interesting.
a lot of
Yeah.
what I coach and focus on is developing, and I don't naturally I have a kind of aggressive personality while training, as you've experienced, and so I
Yeah. Yeah.
have
You go after somebody, you know?
yeah. So
Yeah.
in order to stop myself from getting counter over the place, I had to develop these kind of closed loops, and that required me
Mm.
to really develop an understanding of what each throw was for. Like understanding that coach uses not just the throw, it's a jab. Like
Yeah.
understanding, some of these things I mentioned are intuitive, but understanding like,
Yeah.
oh, Kosoto, if I'm gonna go Kosoto, that's all right, it's all or nothing. Or
Yeah.
this better damn work.
Yeah.
Uh, Um,
Man, wow, man, that's so very interesting. All right, so bringing it back, looping it all the way back to your differentiated instruction. So you're teaching this woman how to scout because she's injured.
yep. And then my
Okay.
hope is by her learning how to scout, one, that's a good skill set to have because we're not all gonna be able to do randori forever, but we all want to enjoy
Yeah.
judo. And just like
Yeah.
the more you know about judo, the more fun it is to watch, more you see interesting things. And then the other thing
Yeah.
is she's a competitor. So she needs to be able to do some of this herself because I only have 24 hours in the day. And if
Yes.
I can get it to the point where she can do the first go of it, then I can look at it and saves me time. So, and then down the road, hopefully she's good enough at it that she can teach somebody
Yeah.
else. And this continues this
Yeah.
virtuous cycle that I talked about with developing teachers.
Mm. So you might have her teaching, maybe some people that are interested in that, like
Mhm,
in one camp, and then you'll have another group doing, elbows are injured, so like a
mhm,
limited thing, and then this
mhm,
group would be beginners, so you'll do like a gripping thing,
mhm.
and then you'll have 4 or 5 different classes going on at once. Is that what you're
Yeah.
saying?
Usually I can run up to 4 in my head pretty easily if without a ton of pre-planning.
Yeah.
With pre-planning, you can do a lot because as long as you have people who are self-motivated, you can, all right, here's a throwing dummy.
Yeah.
Here's what you're working on today, and I'll just check in with them. Um, but typically, second. But typically that's it. It's you figure out what someone can do. If you start with, and this kind of comes back to, my experience. Jimmy is one of the first teachers I had that wasn't like, what can he not do? It was what can he do? So I try to extend that spirit of like, all right, you're on the mat. You might have a limitation. Let's not focus on limitation. Let's figure out what you can still do to make progress.
Mm,
And that's kind of the philosophical approach.
yeah.
Because if you do that, one is you might have someone come out and it looks like they're just going to be a scrub. You never know if that person it has something really interesting off the mat that they're going to enrich your club by just being there, which is a huge thing in DC.
1000%, I agree with you.
And
Yeah.
two, you also don't know. This might be somebody who maybe they have an injury that they don't know about yet. And once it's resolved, they're a phenomenal athlete. Or maybe it's someone
Yeah.
who they've got the dedication, the grit. Or maybe it's just someone who they become a good training partner. And I vehemently dislike when folks don't kind of recognize that human element to bring people in. It's just
Yeah.
good for the club if you could find a way to be as inclusive as possible. And that doesn't mean that you don't have that. All right, guys, I'm letting you all know this is an elite practice. I can have you over in the corner doing something and I'll help you set it up. But no, my attention's here. Like that happened for senior nationals. That was where I said, everybody, okay, I have people getting
Yeah.
ready for US nationals.
That's completely okay if you set that expectation. Hey,
Mhm.
like, I'm gonna bring it back to you so they know and you communicate it. That's a
Mhm.
huge thing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Amazing. Amazing.
so that's my approach. And look, I'm not perfect at it. There are mistakes that occur. It's a natural thing. And I'm a young coach and I'm still learning, but
Yeah.
that's the approach I hope to maintain and continue
Yeah.
going forward.
Got it. Nice, man. So what is your game like for judo? Like, let's talk a little bit about your judo game and then how
Mhm.
do you differentiate that to like your teaching? Like, do you try to teach them what you're good at, or do you try to like identify stuff that they're good at and try to enhance it? Or do you look at their judo that's already there and then you try to add stuff in? Or like, how is it structured in a way where you can influence them maximally in a positive way?
So I'll say that it depends on who's coming in the door. So I'll give you a good example. When as I mentioned, I'm working with Nick right now. Nick already has a complete game. Like I'm not going to
Uh,
teach Nick anything new. What I can do though is it's more like, hey, let's talk strategically what's going on here.
he lives in Virginia?
No, he's in New Jersey. He comes down here, and then I travel. We do video
Okay.
review and stuff like that.
Yeah.
One of the nice things about that platform I use is that you can upload. I can have videos upload, and I can do a lot of remote. It makes my remote coaching much easier. Um, but but to be straight to your question, if I have someone who's already coming in as an elite competitor, then it's what do you have? Is there something is there something that's theoretically wrong and I can't find a justification for it? Then we'll address it. Like a good example is, are you stance changing? There's not really a reason for it. Like,
Some people do that.
yeah, and there's not like if there's a logic to it that I understand, then like okay, let's enhance, let's figure out how to use it. A good example, a guy came in to get ready for nationals, EJ Lynch. EJ will switch sides, but he's actually can legitimately play as a lefty. So it's like, all right, well, how do we tactically adjust for this? Likewise, when I have people coming through who are just starting, I don't care if their judo resembles mine. In fact, I kind of hope it doesn't. Because uh, I and the reason is it's like I want them. My judo's not going to work for everybody. You have to. Now that said, there are certain conceptual underpinnings that have to be there. I need everyone to know how to grip fight. I need everybody to have newaza. I need everybody to have a basic theoretical understanding of what's going on, and not just invest all their time to learning fourth rows that go the same direction. And there are going to be things that just naturally filter that because of my own biases, people are going to pick up. But the short answer is I try to help people mold the games that are right for them. Sometimes it looks like mine, sometimes it doesn't.
Nice. So in terms of newaza, right? Like where do you put is it over on the pass, juji from top, sankake from top, and then, like that kind of a thing? Or what do you?
Similar. Actually, you nailed three of them. Those are three systems. I also teach Jimmy's wrist system.
The wrist. Okay. Yeah.
I also, because we have a lot of cross-training capability in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, sometimes people pick up stuff from BJJ and be like, okay, this is how you would use that. But it's overall, that's the thing. If I were to say I kind of carbon copied from Jimmy, like a lot of it comes from there. I will say I do emphasize the guard a bit more because I think I still maintain the guard's probably one of the best pedagogical tools that you could have. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Because if I could
about open or closed, or just what kind of guard are you talking about? Open guard. Okay.
Yeah. Open. You start in closed, but you can't really play closed in judo. So you're playing that weird, like my ankles aren't actually locked, but we're really in closed guard.
Yeah.
There's so many things that's useful to teach from there. Cause one, it can be hard to teach timing in judo because if you miss it, it hurts. It just does.
And there's balance issues. Yeah, there's a lot of different things playing. Yeah.
But I can create, using the guard, a very easy way for you to learn how to sense where someone's body weight is and teach a basic sweep. I can do with a gas pedal or scissor sweep, and a week or two, what might take somebody 3 or 4 months to learn to sense on their own, just doing stand-up judo. So it allows the guard as a tool for teaching judo. It's a tool to help people develop and understand where weight is, direction. It's a tool that you can use to create like these small, low risk games that will teach people stuff quickly that they'll then be able to bring to the feet. But you have to make it clear that is what is going on. It's not, and they still get something useful. Look, you can hit people with a flower sweep. If you can armbar from guard, awesome. But if you can, I noticed that my own Ashiwaza got a lot better after a year or two of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and it was because I got better at sensing where people's weight were and being able to time things that were. It's just easier to time things from guard. So once you do things from guard, it becomes a little easier to time things in a faster motion than standing.
Nice. That's a great approach, man, Chris. Yeah.
We've
been here for an hour. Yeah, go ahead. You have a question. We got 5 more minutes. We got to run to the dojo in 5 minutes.
Oh, no worries.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you. So, we talked about a few things. How do you approach teaching timing? How do you approach kind of teaching positioning elements like that? I was just interested.
Yeah, just a lot of repetition and getting the flow in, right? So getting people to be comfortable with their stance and movement, like just the basics of stance and movement is such a big one. If you're taking lots of choppy steps and you can't keep a good base, then it's going to be very difficult, and hand positioning is a big thing that I teach and preach. There's a lot more gripping into dominant position, but I kind of like the idea of the Japanese style. Like you're already locked up 50-50. How do you incrementally gain better hand position? And when you have, a higher collar grip, you could pull their head down and disturb their stance a little bit better, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're regaining their balance, regaining their stance. That's when you could attack the feet, throwing in meaningful feints to disrupt, their attacking patterns and things like this.
Mm-hmm.
And, drilling that sort of thing in sort of like a safe environment where no one's getting bombed, 20-30% intensity, there's no like
Nice.
gripping with the fingers coming at your eyes or anything like that. You just start in 50-50. It's my drill. I'm going to do 10 attacks, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you're gaining position, moving, feinting, creating angles. It's kind of like this 20% semi-cooperative drill.
Flow.
Yes, that I think is the biggest one, because then you get comfortable stepping, moving, disturbing their balance, keeping your balance, and then meaningfully attacking, in combinations, whether it's like Ochi or Soto, right? Snap down Uchimata, fake Uchimata, go Kochi, and then snap, cut the hand or something like this. So I like teaching this kind of approach of like teaching guys to not flow roll, but like flow drill.
Yeah.
And I think, I did it earlier, but you pick it up when you pick it up, and that's
Yeah.
my kind of approach now. And then really listening to the, person who's learning too, is, hey, what do you know? Kind of, a lot of people come with experience. Let's see where you are, and kind of getting the basics of like, hey, have you wrestled or boxed or snowboard? Which foot do you stand with first?
Mm-hmm.
Even if you stand one foot, for grappling, some people are like, yo, I play baseball and I swing in this direction. It's like, okay, so you develop a turn into this direction much more powerfully than the other side.
Oh, I hadn't thought about that with other sports.
Yeah, even like, golf or something, you turn into one direction more, right? So there's limitations in mobility and stuff like that. And then once you get that, you can start, building around it.
You're building that physical vocabulary. You're looking at what movement, what elements of the throw they already know intuitively.
Yes. Yeah. And, everyone starts different. So then when you come into the dojo, just asking questions like, hey, what are you working on? Hey, what'd you have trouble with the other day? And having that communication where they can tell me, certain things that gets them practice in verbalizing some of the stuff, because we're speaking another language. You know what I mean? And then once, a yellow belt tells me like, hey man, I was fighting so-and-so, right first left, I had inside position. He had my sleeve and my shoulders were turned. I was trying to go for Uchimata, but like, and then it's like, you're ahead of the game, man. Just able to like say it. You could picture it, and then you could diagnose it, as opposed to like, oh, every time I go for Uchimata, I get countered, There's no context surrounding it, So like having that kind of dialogue, I think just changes the game when you're teaching someone, coaching somebody, and you're already doing it, so amazing.
Yeah. Well, hey man, I know you have to run the dojo. Thank you so much for having me on. And also nice to see you.
Yeah. Yeah. Same here, man. And let's do it again. Let's do it again. This is amazing. What a great conversation. Where can people find you is my last question.
You find me on Instagram, Chris_circle. Last name's Round. And you can, and I'm at High Noon Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Fitness in Alexandria, Virginia, outside Washington, D.C.
Awesome. So reach out to Chris if you guys can. If you're listening to this, like, oh man, what he said resonated with me, hit him up, Chris_circle.
Yes.
Instagram. All right. Thank you. Thank you very much.